Innovating Leadership, Co-Creating Our Future. I'm Maureen Metcalf, your host and CEO of the Innovative Leadership Institute. Today, our guest is Bob Bush Jr., who joins us to discuss some of the Davos headlines and translate that into leadership moves you can make this quarter. Alongside of that, the World Economic Forum released several reports finding that volatility is now structural, not cyclical. With Bob, we're going to unpack a little bit about what this means. So welcome, Bob.
Thank you for having me, Maureen.
Thank you. We are delighted that you're here. Bob, let's jump into it. The theme was what a spirit of dialogue really means for CEOs. So Davos emphasized global dialogue in a fragmented world. Particularly, what does authentic collaboration look like when blocks harden and multilateral forums stall?
The past is prologue. There's nothing new under the sun. At the fundamental basis of all of this, it's about human nature and the forms that human nature will take, whether it's in a corporate environment or a family environment or an ecosystem environment. You can't tell me that the mamas of the 18th century are any different than the mothers of the 21st century. Corporations with the pursuit of profit, the differences between the labor class and the moneyed class and the landed gentry, all of these things, there are reframes and they're just echoes that go over hundreds and hundreds of years. You can go back to the story in the Bible of the jealousy between Cain. Really? You got a problem with Abel? Really? Eve, you didn't want to listen to the big guy. Really? You want to? This is just the same stuff, frankly, over and over again. It's different characters, it's different settings, it's different contexts. How do we all get along? How do we create purpose? How do we figure out ways to elevate ourselves, but not do it at the expense of others? These are historical, biblical, human conditions that manifests in all these different kinds of narratives. But when you strip the stuff down, we are not much different than somebody was fighting about fire, right? Somebody was fighting about the wheel. Call it AI, call it whatever. It's the same kind of stories, Maureen. So it's not to say that I'm nonplussed about it, because I'm not living in those days, of course, because I have children and I care about their futures. But I am a bit sanguine because I'm not a historian, but I try to learn from the past and I try to understand historical context and movements, etc., so that it allows me to have a little bit more of a rigorous, less anxious approach to dealing with today's issues.
You have lived and worked internationally, and I think that's relevant to your perspective that it is not US centric. It is far more global.
Yeah, thank you for that. And it's true, but I'll tell you my first experience. I'm from the Midwest. I grew up in a little town. I was born in a town called Centerville, Illinois. 3,000, 4,000 people all in. The biggest city there was then East St. Louis, which is on the Mississippi River, and then across was St. Louis, Missouri, with the Arch, for those people that don't know the Midwest very well. And I remember going to high school, crossing the bridge from the East St. Louis side of the Mississippi to the St. Louis side of the Mississippi. And that contrast of what I was seeing with the city, the demographic makeup of the city, the economics of the city, then seeing this shiny arch on the skyline as I went to this fabulous boys' school, St. Louis U High, shout out to the Junior Billikens, right? And in the rearview mirror, I'm seeing really what I call the tale of two cities. And yes, being able to go from being in the Midwest, from a small town, I backpacked through Africa on a travel scholarship from Johns Hopkins. I've lived in the Middle East. I've lived in India. I've lived in China. I've done business in all these places. But that real spark in me came that 30-minute drive, but often because I didn't have a car. My parents couldn't afford to give me a car for high school. I would catch buses. I would catch two buses. That 30-minute car drive often turned into 1 hour, 45 minutes each way to get to school. And in watching all of that, it really put a spark in me that the world is bigger than my little neighborhood. The world is bigger than my lawn, etc. And that impulse of recognizing that as great and big and as wonderful as the United States is, there is a lot more going on out there. And that perspective is really, as you note, informed my view on things. At the end of the day, I'm still a Midwestern kid from a small town, but the privilege I've had of really being able to create dialogue and have conversations and work for other governments and work for other businesses that were non-American really has helped me the world in which we live.
So, in that context, one of the things that I was reading from Davos is cooperation just looks different now. Where we had large blocks post World War II, there was an order of how things happened. That order is shifting, and many of those large blocks are dissipating, but they're being replaced with smaller agreements, accords. So we're not losing cooperation and collaboration. It's just different.
I would actually say it's more of an equilibration, that there's always and has always been movement and jockeying for position and trying to maintain hegemony. That's always been happening. But one of the things that sort of these multilateral agreements have often done is if you look at the surface of an ocean or a lake or something where it's quite smooth at the surface. But as you get deeper, it gets darker and there's an undertow. That undertow has been in our relations between Russia and China, and it used to be Japan during the 80s and 90s, etc. That undertow has always been there. And so part of what the diplomacy does and what good frameworks do is to hope it doesn't rise to the surface and bubble up and start capsizing little boats and big boats and all of that. Having had the pleasure of living and traveling in Africa, I hear those conversations. And I would often hear over the decades, Bob, it looks like everything's okay, but we are deeper in this water and it's not okay for us. It's okay for the big boys and the big ships because that little wave doesn't capsize some big old ocean liner, but that little swell can actually hurt these little emerging market countries or those that are not part of the solar system that is anchored by the 3 or 4 major economies. I remember having literally a conversation with Henry Kissinger about his moves into China, as going in under the auspices of Nixon, et cetera, and how we thought, hey, China is this market, we can sell a bunch of American stuff. It ended up being, no, the Chinese don't want to buy American stuff, and they flipped the switch, and they became America's factory for selling us cheap stuff, right? And so these undertows of who's going to maintain the system and who's going to have some dominance in the system, it has always been there. It manifests itself. But despite having said all of that, I'm still quite the optimist because I think the likelihood of a full conflagration worldwide kind of thing is less than it's been in previous decades, et cetera. A lot of the world, including China, recognize the benefits of cooperation and the benefits of certain type of capitalism, which is not necessarily American style capitalism. I think when I mentioned this point about how the student is now the teacher, a lot of these places where we were exporting our culture, our ways of doing things, our ideals, guess what? When they hit India, they get interpreted differently. When they hit the Middle East, they get interpreted differently, and Asia, etc. And they put their own spin on it. And we better listen, and we must listen, because they've learned and they've watched and they've seen and they've adapted. And so this equilibration is a natural order of things where when you really do have someone formidable that has been paying attention, you're going to have to reset it a little bit. I actually think it's good for the world and actually good for America when there are others that can hold and pull their weight.
I appreciate your optimism because it is easy to get pulled into the prevailing news cycle. One of the things that the World Economic Forum reports talk about is that volatility is now becoming structural. And for me, the idea that systems give us what they were designed to give us. So we may be in some edge cases now for what our systems were designed for, but we are still within tolerance of what the system is designed for. So in a time of volatility, you've seen leaders around the globe function in, let's call them better times and worse times. What kind of mindsets have you seen that CEOs could take on right now that would help them be most successful?
I think we have to recognize that there's a paradox to volatility. In times of low volatility, for example, the 2008 financial crisis, when volatility is low, we tend to take on more risk. We tend to do more stupid things, actually. Zero volatility you never want because that means you're probably underestimating something. You don't want too much volatility because that can be really disruptive. And so the question is really around optimizing and recognizing that some volatility in a certain aspect can be higher, and certain volatility in a different industry or a different sector or a different element can be higher or lower. And the question then becomes to not have so much volatility corrupt or pollute or create a contagion in another area, right? Because when you're really trying to put in the work, you want a difference of opinion. You want a certain amount of conflict because that's how problems get solved. That's how you come up with sustainable solutions to create some balance. Because if I'm lifting a weight and I put 100 pounds on one side of that bar and 0 pounds on the other side of that bar, you can't lift it. It's unstable. Volatility can be the market's way of seeking equilibrium and seeking some kind of balance. So I think whether it's, to answer your question, trying to give advice to leaders or others, recognize there's some good in it. Actually, you need to be wary and aware of risk. You need to be wary and aware of when there's too much asymmetry and too much bias. So the question then becomes, what is healthy volatility, and whether or not you have the filters, the skill set, the mindset to manage it. But what you can't do is get so either seduced because it's low where you think things are safe because then you're not locking your doors, all right? Or you lock your doors and you got your gun and you got your siren and you got your alarm and everything looks like it's coming at you, right? And so often is the volatility real or is it just fear? Is the volatility because of your failure to make a proper assessment? Or is the volatility something that it's a real risk and a real concern that you really need to figure out what you're going to do to secure your economy or your industry or your company?
Beautiful. I love the idea that over indexing on either side creates inappropriate or unsuccessful behavior. And one of the things that struck me as useful is the idea that at some points in history, we could plan and manage change. At this point, we're looking at scenarios, we're indexing more on foresight than plans, and we are significantly indexing on agility over large facilities that are most efficient. But as things ebb and flow, how do I increase my probability of success, which for someone who's a little commitment phobic is kind of a natural.
Yeah, no, it's a very good question. And so you've got the seduction that AI is going to be this wonderful forecasting engine. And it can do some very good things. So, what's the difference between forecasting and, as you mentioned, foresight? Foresight is really about preparedness, and forecasting is really about prediction. I don't know if I can't predict who's going to come into my home and steal my stuff. I don't know. I've got insurance for that. So at a certain level of granularity, I don't care. I just need to know I need to lock my doors. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And the foresight is there's always going to be a shock. There's always going to be something that's going on. I don't know what it's going to be. I don't know what to call it. I can tell you in my own business, 6 months after we started Mutombo Coffee, COVID came out of nowhere. Now I'm trying to create an international supply chain, taking coffees from Africa, from the Congo, because that's where my former partner was from, and we were trying to help farmers there. So now the whole world is shut down. What does that do to a little business like ours, trying to be involved in international trade? It was a challenge, but it wasn't just a challenge for us, it was a challenge for everybody. So there's no way I could have predicted that. But I knew that starting a business is going to have all kinds of risks. So we want to have a good team. We want to have a little bit of cash. We want to have a resilient mindset, right? So when COVID came out of the blue, everyone said, what are you guys going to do, shut down? I said, absolutely not. I didn't know what it was going to be. We knew it was going to be something. And then my partner got cancer. So now it wasn't some big issue in the world that everyone's affected by. Now, this is related directly into the business. The person who I started the business with, there is this saying that you should build companies in tough times. And I do think there's something to that, because when we started this business, there were so many things coming at us so quickly. And then you had tariffs, right? Trying to do business in Africa is already tough. Trying to do agriculture with Africa is tough. Then you're dealing with COVID. Then you're dealing with cancer. Then you're dealing with tariffs, right? We're just the little engine that could at the end of the day, because of this very point that I don't have to predict with any level of specificity. I just assume the crap is going to hit the fan. Everybody get ready. We will deal with it. It will be okay. And I think that's the macro sort of perspective you have to have. You can obviously use the tools that you have. You look at interest rates, you look at exchange rates, you look at costs of shipping and all these other kinds of issues. You need to be smart about things. You need to use the tools, AI included, that can help you make better decisions. But foresight at the root of it is about mindset. Whatever's coming, we will figure out a way to manage it. And then the specific tools for management, obviously, you can bring expertise and other things into it. But for me, foresight is more a mindset than a particular methodology.
So, one, I'm incredibly sorry to hear about your partner. That journey is, for anyone, excruciating, and you've lived through it and tried to keep a business going. And not only tried, but have kept a business going.
Sure, thank you.
One of the things I hear that I think is interesting and valuable, we know stuff's going to go wrong. That's not pessimistic, that's reality. And the flip side, we will figure it out, also not delusional positivity. It's all going to be okay, but terrible things will happen.
I don't want to speak at a certain a platitude where people are like, well, of course that's true. Something a little bit more actionable. What does optionality mean? So in our case, initially we were just looking to source product from one country. We realized that we were going to have to diversify our sourcing strategy, because our sourcing strategy could be a single point of failure. It's great to have, let's say, Walmart as your client, but if they're 99% of your business and they decide to pull the plug, or they decide they need you to save 5%, you're done. So diversification, as it is in portfolios, is important. And there are different kinds of diversification. There's actual risk diversification. If you think about your business as a series of risk buckets, you want to make sure that you're placing some small bets, high risk, but high payoff opportunities. You can't bet the farm on the fact that you're going to win this contract or whatever. You treat it like an out of the money option. You put a little bit of bet on it. In finance, there's this concept in options called spread betting, right? The spread is the difference between the bid and the ask. That's the spread. And you put a small bet on something that has a very high return, but it's asymmetric, right? If I put $1 on something that might yield me 100 to 1, my loss is $1 because that's all I bet. A little bit of money for those with really asymmetric upsides, and you know what your loss is going to be. Then you've got another risk bucket, which is the bond of your decision making, right? Maybe we're not going to open up a wholly owned subsidiary at the moment. Maybe we're going to look for a partnership. Maybe we're going to look for a licensing deal as opposed to investing a lot of CapEx at the moment. So these kinds of real option types of decisions, good CEOs and good leadership do anyway. But I think about it in terms of options and optionality in these risk buckets so that you've always got, I think, the worst thing, and even Buffett will tell you that, and I think Buffett has something like $300+ billion in cash at the moment, but he's still got a lot more of that he's put to work. So obviously cash is the worst thing that you could be in, but the reason why he says that he has it is because someone's going to be calling with $100 billion idea, and there's only going to be 2 guys on the planet that can do it, and you want to be one of them. And so if you think about your decisions as sort of these risk buckets where there's asymmetric payoffs, that's one thing that you can do, and often diversifying your bets can do that. I think the other thing you can do practically is you have to ask yourself, what is your edge? Betting like a roulette wheel or something where you're putting these different bets based off of probability, and what your true edge is. Do we have an advantage in this space? Do we have an idea? Do we have a relationship that will give us an insight that the market has not figured out yet? At some point, the market has to figure it out because that's how you realize the value. If you're always making the bet that everyone else is making, you're not going to look that different than the other guy. And so if your posture is to survive and to stay in the middle of the pack, there's nothing wrong with that. If you're a baby elephant and the jackals are coming, you're better get in the middle of big mama elephants because the jackals will eat you. So there's nothing wrong with drafting and looking for the safety and security of those that are bigger around you. You can survive. You don't typically excel, but maybe that's your posture, and that's okay. We just need to survive this because the jackals are circling. So you got to have what you think the posture of the business is, but again, just make sure is based off of data, based off of real risk assessment, not based off of your own fear or non-logical or your own personality, because that's the kind of thing that ultimately is going to catch you up, which is why often you see CEOs, et cetera, not lasting as long, because if I can get 10 to 12% play in the market, why would I want to make an investment in this private equity guy or in this business? Let me just buy the index. So at some point, you've got to figure out your edge if you're going to grow, if you're going to distinguish yourself. So simply diversification and figuring out your edge and what that means are 2 very solid ways of creating a way through which you can navigate the course.
So value orchestration, understanding your edge and placing bets appropriate so that you're going to deliver more than the market. Otherwise, yeah, I put my money in a much lower risk opportunity.
That's right. I like your term orchestration. I think it's interesting because you know this, and maybe many of your readers do. The conductor of an orchestra is never on beat. He's slightly ahead of the symphony because he's signaling what's coming next. So orchestration is exactly right. He can't be too far ahead of the rest of the musicians, but he's actually a beat or two ahead because he's got a signal to the violinist, you're coming in the next one. He's signaling to the trombone because they're different instruments. And in a big room, depending on the acoustics, he's got to do slightly different signaling because of the way the sound reverberates in that room, the acoustics in that room. Orchestration is a very interesting use here. Steve Jobs used to talk about that. I remember watching a video of him and he was saying, someone has said, you don't do anything. Why are you worth so much? You're not a good engineer. You don't do this. You don't do that. His true value is to really get the best out of all the instruments that he's assembled. First, in having music,
Foresight.
that's the vision. And in assembling those that will follow his vision and mission. And then orchestrating them so that their timing isn't off and they can sound great and in harmony, right? That is my aspiration in this business. I don't grow coffee or cocoa. I'm not a farmer. I actually had a garden, and I can tell you my thumb is not green, but this notion of setting the pace, setting the mission and vision, assembling the team, knowing when to bring them in, getting the timing right to do something great and meaningful and in harmony is exactly why I like that term, orchestration. Yeah.
So this takes us back to foresight, that in an ecosystem that is more rapidly changing, it's not necessarily unstable, but it is more fluid than many leaders are accustomed to. Tying that back to something you said earlier, and that's the resilience mindset and the resilience of the system, that you had confidence that you would navigate. You knew stuff would go wrong. You didn't know what. You're paying attention to trending, and you have the capacity to help yourself first as the leader and everyone who counts on you to find solutions and respond accordingly.
Yeah. The notion of an ecosystem, which I think I like more than network, ecosystems really, hopefully, are self-reinforcing. But you can be in a network and be a taker or a giver. You can be in the network, but you're not actually creating a lot of value necessarily in the network. And so I think what you are and those around you, are they playing the game for the network effect? And there are a lot of Silicon Valley guys that are playing that game. Or are they playing a game about helping to develop and create an ecosystem, which hopefully everyone that's in that ecosystem will gain and benefit? That's one thing that I am very mindful of. And it's okay. Is this a transaction? Is this a relationship? And so when I'm trying to assess things and going into different markets, I'm in Houston at the moment. I'll be in Philly. We're going to Detroit. We're going to Atlanta. We're going to New York, LA, and Milwaukee, and some other places. I'm constantly assessing the nature of that ecosystem. And what I do and my team helps me do is an opportunity assessment and a risk assessment. What I mean by that is there are systemic risks, there are structural risks, there are structural elements of that ecosystem, there are systematic, and then there are unsystematic. And so when I'm really trying to make sure that we're not just jumping off a cliff, so let me explain those a little bit. The systemic risk is the risk that was the Lehman, where it created a cascade. It was a threat that affected all the banks. That's systemic. It's in the system. The contagion sort of runs through everything. There are only a few issues where that will likely happen, where the whole thing burns. Very rare, but it is not impossible, as we've seen. You've got the unsystematic, which is my team. It is the management of my team. It is a regulatory challenge. It's a legal challenge, something industry specific. How does this technology affect my business or my client, et cetera? There's a little bit more control that we have over those things. I can't control what the other guy does in this industry that I'm in, but I can certainly mitigate, maybe not control, but certainly mitigate some of that. When we are going into a market, we are literally going and talking to the mayor's office, to talk to the different coffee shops, the cafes, why the mayor's office, understand what they think about supporting small businesses. I want to understand, as I've said to many mayors over the last year, I can tell the quality of your neighborhood or community by the quality of whether or not there is a local coffee shop that local neighbors are comfortable going to. If you don't have in that neighborhood a local barber where the guys can get their haircut, or a local salon where the women want to go, a good supermarket, a good coffee shop, everyone knows, yes, how far is the hospital away? How far is the school away? But these little things where the businesses want to go and hang out and have a coffee and contributing to the community, if you don't have those little businesses, which is the knitting of that community, right? That's why I want to go talk to the small business development and talk to the mayor's office about how are they doing that? Is that really there or not? And the litmus test is take me to your best coffee shop in this neighborhood, right? Then we want to go talk to, the universities. And we do this. What does that actually have to do with just trying to move some beans from Africa into a coffee shop or to a corporation? Because I'm assessing that ecosystem. Because of all the cities and all the places that we're going to invest and spend time, I want to know if that ecosystem is going to ultimately support our vision and mission. We like to say our coffee's great, but it's the conversation between the sips. I want to know the kinds of conversations that are being had if you're having our coffee or if you're having a stroopwafel, and who's in those conversations. Then I'll know whether or not we want to be part of that community, because I'm trying to be a part of a community as an ecosystem, not as a network, as I want to figure out how I can create value and contribute.
As I'm listening to you, it strikes me that trust is the currency.
May I be a little bit contrarian? Do you mind?
Go ahead.
Your listeners, can you handle this? I don't know. I'm going to give you what I'm thinking off the top. I really hope that trust is not the new currency, because every currency in the history of humanity has been debased. You give me a currency that has not been debased, and I'll tell you it wasn't a currency. The Romans started putting more copper in their silver coins. The Americans started printing more, the money supply, the printing press. If it's a currency, God help us, because they're going to do the same thing with trust, and you can see it because, in fact, people do treat it like the currency. They debase the heck out of trust. And I hope it's not that, because I see too much of using that as the metaphor, how people then try to manipulate trust in the same way that they can manipulate the money supply, for God's sake. Now, what do we really want it to be? We recognize its value. We recognize what does trust give us? Trust gives us speed. Trust reduces friction. Trust gives us all kinds of wonderful efficiencies, creates relationships, etc. Because I recognize and appreciate trust, I just want us to analogize with something that is not a currency, because we haven't done very good at managing our currencies.
So what would you call it?
Great question. That's why I hesitated with regards to going out on this limb a little bit. Here's the problem with the currency, as I've said, but if you think of trust as merely a medium of exchange, therein is the problem. I want to trust you not because there's an exchange imminent, right? I want to trust you. I want to take it out of the world of, and I am an unabashed capitalist. I understand transactions and I understand currency and all of those kinds of things. But if we can make it so that trust is about human connection more than it is about transaction, then we're keeping the heart of what trust is. Again, why do I want to trust you? If trust is a new currency, then I let you in my home because of Airbnb. I don't let you in my home because I like talking to you. I don't let you in my home because I like breaking bread with you. Airbnb created a system where it was able to operationalize trust so people would feel comfortable inviting strangers into their home. Uber and Lyft have used trust as a currency so that people will feel comfortable driving strangers in their car. There's a tremendous amount of value in thinking about trust as currency, but I'm suggesting that we don't think about trust as merely or only currency,
Okay.
because then you're missing the thing that is truly the essence of what trust is about, which is for human connection, not human transaction. Hope that gets it.
That gets it.
You started with the World Economic Forum. One of the reports in the World Economic Forum stated that when trust goes up 10%, GDP goes up by 0.5%. You can measure the impact of efficiency and growth and all those things. Values should not be conflated with valuation. If you want to value my company, you can look at cash flow, earnings, all these things. We're in a growth phase, so many listeners, no profits, it's all being reinvested and continue to grow, right? But if you make the proposition all about the valuation of the company, we're a faith-based company. We are a values-driven company. We're a social enterprise, right? And so people that we want to work with and that want to work with us and want to drink our coffee and want to be part of the ecosystems that we're creating, it's about the valuation. It's about the values. It's about sustainability of relationships. It's about creating connectivity and community. And all those things are not necessarily going to be measurable with dollars and cents. Buffett said this many years ago, that it's tough to have a business that's triple bottom line. You want a business that makes a lot of money, and you make the money that you can do whatever you want with it. You can give it away, as he's done with his giving pledge and all that. So what we're trying to do is really difficult when you're trying to make money and do good. It's difficult, but it's not impossible. That's why we don't view trust merely as a currency, because we're not in this merely to maximize or optimize profits. We're trying to maximize, optimize community and conversation. So it's got to be more than a currency. It's got to be a value.
I think you should come to Columbus, Ohio.
I think you just have to invite me and tell me where I come. We'll do a coffee talk and we'll have some cocoa and stroop waffles.
Bob, as we wrap up, what 3 items stand out from our conversation that a leader listening to this can take away and do something with in the next 90 days?
Learn to distinguish the signal from the noise.
Okay.
That links to really making sure you understand true volatility, true risk, separating it from panic, separating it from there's good volatility, like there's good debt, all of that. So really being able to separate the signal from the noise, because there's so much information coming out, so many interpretations and layers of that information. So how do you do that? You've got to have a GPS system, and not the typical algorithm AI generated Google Maps GPS system. I like to call it my God positioning system. I like to call it my GPS because I want to know what my true North Star is for myself, for my business, for the ecosystem I'm operating in. If you don't have that kind of GPS system where there's truly alignment of your values with your actions, you're going to get whipsawed. And the algorithm and the AI might tell you anything. It hallucinates too. It has biases too. So really make sure that your North Star is centered around your purpose, your personal purpose, your corporate purpose, and know how to translate that, starting with your family, starting with your employees, and then how they can amplify that, et cetera. If you can do that well, no matter what the vagaries are of this marketplace, there will always be a place for you.
So let me jump in with a couple of things I heard then, starting with over the arc of time, humans have evolved our technology, but the fundamental things we as people care about, parents want to raise healthy kids. We want healthy families and healthy neighborhoods and places for our next generation to thrive. So that's one. The ecosystem idea, as I'm starting a business, running a business, working for a business, living my life as a family member, understand that things will go wrong. I don't know what will go wrong. And that's not pessimistic, that's living in the reality we live in. And create my own conditions so that I will be able to successfully navigate those challenges. All of those things, using your words, are based on my GPS. That during a trip to Tanzania, where British Airways was on strike and I ended up in a hotel by myself, and talking to the chef and the housekeeper and the team there. And I said something about just buy a book. It's only $25. And what I learned was that's a month's wage. They're not buying a book on Amazon like I am. They're not buying audiobooks. They're paying for bus transportation to and from. And so part of my motivation for the podcast was, how do I put good information out into the world every week that is no cost to people who can't afford good information?
I love that. You did a better summary than I did on that. So thank you for listening. Tanzania is a very interesting place. We source coffee from there. They have an excellent pea berry in Tanzania. Tanzania is a lovely country, lovely people. I bet you that despite the annoyance perhaps of British Airways being on strike, that might have been some of the few extra unexpected days that you had in a long time.
It was a brilliant opportunity to connect in a way with the local people that I wouldn't have had if I were just climbing a mountain. And so it was an incredibly precious few days that had a deep impact on how I saw the world, how I still see the world. And the idea of global collaboration, what you're doing with coffee and bringing economic support to local farmers is what makes our bigger ecosystem function in a way that I would call healthy.
Yes, thank you. I like to say I love Swiss chocolate, but little Swiss Miss is not a farmer, and the Swiss don't grow cocoa beans.
Yeah, they come from Ghana.
Ghana, Ivory Coast, and a couple other places, right? And so there's this rich tapestry of colors and music and narratives that can really bring the world closer together if they're unpacked and unlayered. And it doesn't have to be coffee. I encourage you, as you're doing with the work that you're doing, that global thread, that connectivity is much more attainable than they may think, because we are interconnected whether we want to be or not.
That's a beautiful note to end on. Thank you, Bob. This has been a delightful conversation.
I appreciate you, Dan, as well. Looking forward to seeing it hit the airwaves.
To our listeners, thank you for joining and for your attention. We will have information about Bob's coffee in the show notes, and he is offering a discount to all of our listeners, so please check that out.